on Australia's business channel. This is Media Week.
Hello, welcome to the program. Ahead, we're going to look at some of the big programming launches coming next week and the latest research into the rise of second screen social media use by consumers. How much is it impacting the first screen, traditional TV? But first, the second radio ratings survey of the year is out, and here to take us through the results is our co-host James Manning, the editor and publisher of Mediaweek. James, always great to see you.
Hello.
Now, and especially ratings, so much going on. Obviously, this is the second survey of the year. Let's start. We'll have a look through, and if you could just take us through how things changed. Sydney, obviously,
there's been
first.
a lot of focus, obviously, this year. A couple of big changes, particularly in the Sydney market. Great news again for ARN with their rebranded KISS 1065. We had the Chief Executive in, Kieran Davis, not long ago after the first save, and we said, you must be ahead of your business plan. He said, no, we're right on it. So he's expecting further growth, and they certainly got it, this survey. Did very well. 2GB, of course, still number one overall, but not getting nearly the amount of eyeballs they'd like to. We've talked about that in the past, but Nova and WSFM are also in that top 5 commercial stations. Look, Smooth creeping in there too. So you've got two Nova Entertainment stations there, 2 ARN and no Southern Cross Austereo.
And it was interesting hearing Craig Bruce actually speaking ahead of the release of the results as well.
Yeah, look, he was sort of warning the market, look, it's going to be a long turnaround here. We're not expecting anything to happen overnight. And he was certainly right. There's nothing. There was a small turnaround. They edged up ever so slightly, but still a long way behind the rest of the pack.
All right, let's have a look at Melbourne now as well. 3AW there.
Yeah, look, AW on top there. Big mover there was Gold, number one in the number one FM in the market, giving ARN number one stations in all metro markets it plays in for the first time ever. Nova at number 3. Fox hanging in there as Southern Cross Austereo station, but it was down 1.2, so if it dropped much more, that could be out of that top 5, and Mix creeping in, another ARN station, so very good survey for them.
And what about Brisbane? What changes did you see?
97.3 hanging in there again, but look, it's a close race up there. Nova's just edged up behind it. Not much in it there. B105, top 3. At least both Southern Cross Austereo stations in there, but if you drop out of the top 5 in any of the smaller markets, it's not good news because there aren't a lot of stations.
Mm-hmm. In Adelaide as well, what we're seeing?
Yep, again, Mix, ARN, shining light there, up 1.7. 5AA and Nova 2 and 3, so Nova Entertainment's got 2 of the top 3 stations there. Look, Cruise, you know, little AM music station, outgunning both SAFM and Triple M. So look, it's not a great, it's been a tough market for Southern Cross Adelaide for a long time.
And in Perth, Mix as well, 14.4% there.
Yeah, look, the only commercial station to go up in the market was 6PR down the bottom of the top 5 there. They're up 1.6, but yeah, Mix hanging on at the top. Nova and 96 FM, Fairfax's best performing station. They've got 2 of the top 5 there in Perth.
All right. Well, let's also get some more on what we're seeing in the radio market and other sectors as well. And we're joined today on the program by James Hire, Chief Strategy Officer at media agency MEC Global. Great to see you. Thank you so much for coming on the program. Just firstly, on the radio ratings, the big networks obviously impacted there. I just wanted to ask you, I mean, how you're viewing the big changes that we've seen in radio.
Yeah, I mean, the changes are really driven by the station formats here. We're not seeing a huge change in terms of the methodology. Obviously, there's been a change of vendor, and I think people were worried there was going to be a seismic shift in the relative ratings, but that's really been driven by the changes within the stations themselves.
Look, the Sydney market, talk to me a little about the importance there. We've seen some big moves in Sydney. Does that impact network buys, or do people more really buy market by market?
So I think it does both. It's not something that, you know, it's just one particular area. Obviously, numerically, people buy market by market. You'll be potentially constrained by your trading deal because you might have a share between 2 different vendors, and one of them, frighteningly, may not be ARN right now.
And that's your annual deal you're talking about?
That's correct. The larger players obviously are able to go across all of the different vendors, but there is an emotional piece to it. You know, you have a natural geographic bias, whether you're a planner sitting in an agency or, importantly, a client. So if the client sees what's happening and doesn't see that station on their schedule, they're obviously going to be perturbed by it. So there is an emotional part of doing well in Sydney as well.
Yeah.
Just wanted to ask you too, because something we were speaking with James about just before was the fact that we saw the Southern Cross Stereo head of content, Craig Bruce, come out before the ratings were even released and talk about the fact, saying, look, Today FM, it still does have the biggest cumulative audience. How important is that, that sort of measure?
When you're planning and you're doing average quarter hours by a station for a particular state, and honestly, your total cum is not important. It's really down in the detail. So it's a sales drive, and if you're doing well in Sydney, you're going to talk about that. If you're doing well nationally, you're going to talk about that. And this is not unique to radio. So if you look at the television stations, who's killing it in news in Brisbane versus Sydney versus Melbourne, they tend to be different. So this is, and if you look at outdoor and whether, if you're based in Sydney, JC Deco is very different to Melbourne, and, the same for Adshell. So really your locality can actually quite, influence the buying decisions that you're making.
Yeah, look, it must be a real puzzle for these guys because they get they see the releases and everybody can claim to be number one, can't they? Depending on what you count, ARN, number one FM, or its markets are Nova, Record Cume, number one under 40. And I think depending on how Southern Cross or Stereo count their Cume audience, still the biggest radio audience in Australia. So a bit of a challenge there. But is money starting to move, do you think now? We've seen 2 surveys with the sort of new regime in Sydney, if you like. ARN really shining in all markets, but particularly in Sydney. Will they be seeing money sort of, I hesitate to use the term flooding in the door, but doing a bit better?
Yeah, ARN would like to hear that too. I think so. I mean, what happens is you have lead indicators and lag indicators, and agencies in the end are going to make a more considered decision about where they invest their monies. But things like direct advertisers, who are only privy to the headlines they see in the newspapers and what they hear from their friends, are likely to be taking 100% of their monies and pushing it into the stations they hear are delivering audiences. So they're not, able to look at the sort of detail that we have. And, secondly, just anecdotally in our agency, when we are moving towards trying to buy short-term inventory in KISS in particular, we are seeing that there is a little bit of, inventory overload in terms of their buys.
Really interesting. Just as well on another topic altogether, very interesting research that you've been doing with Seven on the second screen, the impact of the second screen, and just in terms of what you found, how much is it impacting the first screen?
I think it's great. We're going from the sublime to the ridiculous. Yeah. We've got radio diaries that I think I listened to this versus real time I actually did something. We found something extremely powerful, and I think it's powerful for television. It's helping television sell its engagement to media houses such as ourselves, and us understanding more clearly what those audiences vote for with their phones, with their pads, and with their PCs.
But the research says, and I think this probably has been done over a little while ago, wasn't it? It wasn't all just that recent, but it's still within the current, I guess, the way people are still using the screens. Tell me about the results of Great News for TV. You talked about that, measuring the engagement. When you talk about engagement, what do we actually mean by engagement?
So that's one of the important parts of this research, was that engagement is normally someone filling out a piece of paper on 1 to 10, how engaged were you? Because what we did was we did it neurologically. So that means you can't fib, you can't help yourself. We know exactly what happened. And we saw that when people moved from the first to the second screen, neurologically they changed from being more global processing to more detailed processing. What that means is when I moved from my mobile to the first screen, the television, I was picking up more cues, more URLs, more product specifics, more details than I would have prior to going into the second screen. It's neurological, you can't help yourself.
I was thinking that do agencies, do media proprietors, and particularly the old media, do they need to sort of keep that in mind when they're trying to market their medium to advertisers? There's things that's going to interest you, new ways of measuring that?
I think what's really important is this is dramatically changing the television stations and their executive producers, the EPs, and how they program. It's gone from don't touch the first 15 minutes. We need to leave it stable so we can get the audience involved to do something in the first 15 minutes, get people to tweet, post on Facebook, and act as real-time rating recruiters to bring more audiences into the show earlier on. So there's that part to it. The other thing that we know as advertisers is If you're more neurologically engaged, you're more likely to note and remember the television commercial. So more engaged audiences are better for us. And if you look at something like Twitter ratings, that's going to give us a hotspot on all of those programs, and we'll know where people are more neurologically engaged and then likely to be better noting our commercials.
And, I mean, it was mainly Twitter, Facebook at this stage?
Those are the two dominant platforms. In all honesty, the companion apps are not really anywhere in terms of the scale of those two.
And that's just another research tool in the way you spend your money.
So
the existing ways of measuring.
Yeah, I think it adds a really powerful overlay into our understanding of which programs. If you have two programs with exactly the same rating, which one are you going to choose if it's got much more engagement from a social perspective and the CPMs are the same? You're going to take that one. People are more engaged with that program, more likely to know your commercial, and that means they're more likely to respond to something you're going to put out there.
It's really interesting. Fascinating. Thank you so much for coming on and telling us a bit about it. James Hire there from MEC Global. We're going to take a very quick break here on Media Week. Coming up, one company that we've just been mentioning there, the forefront of this second screen use, Facebook. It's seen profits nearly triple in the latest quarter. More details on that next.